Hey everybody, Jeff Johnson here. It's another edition of Game On here on GameNTrain.com, and we're touching back on a game that we got a chance to talk a little bit about when it first came out. We got a chance to try State of Decay, the open world sandbox game that everybody was trying. In fact, 500,000 copies of this game were sold within a week, and now we're delving a little bit more into the impact this game is going to have. And I've got a special guest joining me to help me out with this. Joining me from Rue Morgue magazine, Canada's premier horror publication, we've got the managing editor with Rue Morgue, Monica Kuebler. Monica, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you very much.
Now, Monica, State of Decay, this game came out in June, and as I mentioned, we saw plenty of fanfare for it, plenty of good reviews, 500,000 copies sold within a period of a week. That's quite the numbers to see from any horror game.
Yeah, it was definitely quite impressive. I mean, I keep an eye on all the gaming sites, and it really stayed up in the charts for quite a long time, and even now I still see it popping back up into the GameSpot charts every once in a while, so people are still definitely talking about and playing it even, almost 2 months later.
Now, one thing you notice whenever you see a game do incredibly well in sales, I mean, we saw this with Call of Duty, how it was basically a definer of a generation. And with Call of Duty, we saw a lot of different games emulate that. You see the success that State of Decay has had on Xbox Live Arcade, and you have to think that we're going to see other games, other developers trying to emulate this formula. And that's where we got to recognize the good elements that are present here, but there's also some bad elements that come in as well. So I guess the big thing to start off with, what was your impressions on State of Decay?
It really surprised me. I liked it a lot more than I initially thought I would. It had a great deal of replay value, and I think, I was getting a little burned out with zombie games, to be completely honest, because there have been so many of them. And then we got to that point where people were just sticking zombies into any sort of game because zombies were sort of really hot. And I think what State of Decay did, that was very, very smart. It took a different approach to the zombie game, as opposed to, the approach that we've been seeing year after year with games like Dead Island and Dead Rising and Left 4 Dead. It kind of approached a zombie game from a different angle, which sort of made it feel fresh, even though zombie games have been saturating the market for years in horror gaming.
Right, and I think one of the things that really stands out when you look at this game is a lot of the times you saw the zombie horror game sort of emulating that Resident Evil style that was there. What you see more here is almost like a DayZ style of game. And I'm not talking about the DayZ game itself, because that game was kind of crap, but I'm talking about DayZ, World War Z, all of the publications that goes around it.
Well, I think it did a really exceptional job of kind of making you feel and think like you would within an actual zombie apocalypse. Because unlike, say, a game like Left 4 Dead, which is a great deal of fun, that's kind of, you're dashing through, you're shooting every zombie that's coming after you. It's very frenetic, and in many ways it's very draining to play it. I'm not sure how many people can play, 3 or 4 or 5 campaigns of Left 4 Dead in a row. It's a very frenetic style of gaming. Whereas with State of Decay, it sort of did a bigger picture of the zombie world where, not only, do you have to go and, smash some zombie heads in or, blow some skulls off, but at the same time, you had to think some strategy. You had to, maintain your home base, think about your supplies, collect supplies, interact with, other camps. It added an element that I do think you saw a little bit of that in Dead Rising, but it sort of took away a little bit of the freneticness and added more thoughtfulness, if you will, I think.
Right, I was going to mention Dead Rising because that's a game that has almost a similar style to this, just with going up against hordes and hordes of zombies and trying to get through. But to me, Dead Rising has more of that arcade style of gameplay, while this one is more of a simulation base, like taking Grand Theft Auto style sandbox worlds, combining it with zombie horror styles, zombie horror motifs, and putting you into this case where it's either you survive or you don't.
Yeah, exactly. And I call it a love-hate thing because I both loved it and hated it in State of Decay, where you didn't have any control over your saves. So when your character died, it immediately bounces you to, a different friendly character, but that death is permanent, which is something that we don't see that often in zombie games because, in other titles we've been able to, roll back and try a sequence again. Whereas in State of Decay, if you wanted to roll back, well, you'd be rolling back and starting the game all over again if you wanted to save that character. Or you just pick up the trick that my husband and I picked up, which is, hey, if you're about to die, just turn the console off really fast.
Been there, done that. No, I've totally done that. I've actually put that trick to use a couple of times. And, you know, the one thing about that, though, I do like that element. It's something you definitely got to get used to. It makes you think more strategically as you go through the game. And it really makes you realize just how many different characters you have to work with going through it.
Absolutely. What was also interesting was that they imbued those characters with different strengths and weaknesses. So, you know, I'm sure you played it yourself. You realize that there were like 2, 3, 4 characters that you really wanted to keep alive because, you know, they were really good at shooting or they were really good at melee. But when you were playing those characters, you were even more careful than when you were playing, you know, some of the more standard issue survivors.
Now, I mentioned bad elements that were here, and these are some of the things I'm hoping developers don't emulate as things go ahead. And I've addressed this with a couple of our GameNTrain contributors as well. But the one thing that sort of got to me here is you have a sort of simulation of a sandbox world. But at the same time, while you have finite supplies, finite cars, there's an infinite number of zombies. They just keep coming. I mean, how big was this town?
Yeah, that's a zombie game thing, though. You see that so much in zombie games where you clear an area and then they just sort of respawn. But you know what? That didn't personally. That one didn't bother me all that much.
I guess another issue for myself, though, like, I know there was the whole aspect of, like, giving you different missions, like, you know, clear this safe house, go help the neighbors and stuff like that. I just found the pacing of that and just the aspect that sometimes you would have, like, 3 infestations spawn right around your base at the same time. A lot of the times, just the random aspect of that could get a little annoying.
Yes, but it also made the game hairy because, you know, it was one of those oftentimes it'd be like, one of your colleagues is in trouble over there. You've got 3 zombie infestations and there's something that you got to take care of over there. Now, I did like that because which one do you do first? You have to make a choice which may or may not have consequences. And I really love that idea of consequences in a game. And one thing, you know, we're talking about some negatives, but some positives once more of State of Decay is that idea that the characters keep doing stuff when you're not with them.
That's very true. That's one element that I did like. And also the thing I also liked about that was the fact, say that you go to a house and discover supplies. You can always call up the other members of your team and say, hey, come pick this stuff up. I got to go somewhere else.
So, you know, while, yeah, I do agree there's a bit of repetitiveness with some of the missions, I do like that they were tossing multiple scenarios at you at once because I think that added to the strategy. It's like, do you go and save that guy over there or risk him becoming zombie chow? Or do you take care of something else in the meantime? It definitely made you plan. And there haven't been a ton of zombie games where you've had to plan.
That's very true. And, you know, one thing I'm going to find interesting, they just announced this back on July 18th, the guys at Undead Labs, talking about the development of a new Sandbox DLC, which gives you the option to move everything to a new town with new supplies, but no new survivors. So, additional challenge for you as you go.
Well, it definitely, you know, for an arcade title, it was much bigger than I expected and much more complex than I expected. That said, I mean, the most disappointing thing for me with State of Decay was the ending.
That's very true, too. I guess the one thing to look at an ending like that, how do you think about how they left it off? Do you think it leaves room for them to, say, come back with another State of Decay down the road? Or where do you think it leaves things?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen time and time again that you can pretty much make a sequel even when things don't look like they could possibly have a sequel. But I was more talking about the idea, you know, throughout the game, this whole open world, you know, make your own decisions, make your own choices, your choices have an effect, comes into play. But then when you get to the final mission, it's a little less of that.
So basically what we've got there is sort of a Mass Effect situation where, you know, this game promises all of the different choices, all of the different scenarios that you can go through, but at the very end, it comes down to basically 1, 2, or 3 options.
Yes, you're right. That's sort of the same thing that happened with Mass Effect where, you know, they set up this world that's very, very big with choices, and then you come to the end and, you know, building up all those characters and, you know, assembling your great team of survivors and making sure the appropriate character skills are maxed out didn't have so much meaning at that point.
So, looking over everything that we've talked about here with State of Decay, we got ourselves this excellent game. What do you think's going to happen next from Undead Labs? Do you think they're going to come out with the big online version that they've been talking about?
You know what? I'm not sure. I mean, if they do, now would be the time to strike. I mean, people really enjoyed State of Decay. It got a ton of downloads. People are still talking about it. Now would be the time to strike with that. Yeah, I think it would definitely work well as a multiplayer.
I think so too, because really, when you think about it, I guess the one element that I have with this that sort of irked me was just the fact that I get to play this game, I get to build this huge team of survivors, which is awesome, and I love the fact that I get this solitary experience, but I'll be talking along with some of my friends who are also playing, and they're having almost an entirely different experience that I'm thinking to myself, oh man, I'd love to jump in and help them out. I'd love to jump in and just see what I can do to alleviate some of the problems they're having.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a direction for Undead Labs to go there if they wanted to. But, at the same time, those different scenarios are what make the one-player game so inherently replayable. Because I remember, the first time through, we did it one way, and then the second time we were like, well, maybe if we went and got to that safe house earlier and started building that up as opposed to starting here. So it gives you, a lot of options as to different ways to play. And I kind of like that because I don't have a lot of patience for those sneaking around stealth games. I like to shoot and bash. So I loved that with State of Decay, it was a nice balance of that. It's like, yeah, you know what? I might want to sneak around that horde, but that one over there I might want to take head on. It didn't require you to constantly use one style of gameplay or another.
I think we've gone over quite a bit here about State of Decay. First off, Monica, thank you very much for joining me today to talk about State of Decay.
You're welcome.
And I guess if people want to know more about Rue Morgue magazine, where should they go?
The best place to go is directly to our website, which is www.rue-morgue.com.
Excellent. Monica, thank you very much. And I'm Jeff Johnson. You're listening to Game On. You're watching Game On. And this has been our discussion on State of Decay. You know what they say, when life hands you lemons,
do a barrel roll!
And when you want to know about your favorite games, listen to Game On with Jeff Johnson on GameNTrain.com.